Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Episode of The Late Show here on Teachers Talk Radio, where today I'm joined by Katie Finlayson, and we're going to talk all things homeschooling. So what can we, who are interested in education, learning, students and the system as a whole, learn from thinking hard about homeschooling? What is it? What is it not? How does it work? How does it not work? Katie, I check in first of all that you're here and you can hear me.
Yep, I can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me too.
I can. Fantastic. So welcome. Katie is or has home educated her children in the Welsh borders for 15 years, taking them through to the end of secondary education, including their GCSEs and A-levels. 2 of her children are now at or preparing for university, while she continues to educate her younger 2. She became chair of governors at a local primary school a few years ago. And alongside this, Katie has played a leading role in both local and national home education networks. She has run in-person social groups since 2011, helps administer a UK-wide support group with over 75,000 members. She's also a trustee of the Home Educators Qualifications Association. We'll hear more of that later, I think, and works closely with Ofqual, the DFE, and exam boards to support access to qualifications. Her recent work includes running large-scale national surveys and representing at education conferences, particularly on the reasons for home education and access to exams. She's also produced widely used guides and webinars to help families navigate the exam system. Katie, have I missed anything?
No, the only thing is I didn't do A-levels at home. That was like a step too far. I went off to a local sixth form for that. I took them up to GCSEs. And they
Do you know, you didn't
with that stepping stone.
Thank you. You didn't give me that in the info that I took on. I added it in because I thought it was true. I'm very sorry. My error. Okay. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you some of our opening questions. We always ask our guests some of the questions related to themes that have come up in previous episodes of this show. And I'm interested in AI, smartphones and self-efficacy. So there's questions about those 3. Before we dig into those, to give Katie a bit of thinking time, we have a word from our sponsors. So first of all, it's a great chance to plug the TTR newsletter, which we're hoping you've subscribed to already. It's weekly. It's called Sound Bites and Insights, and it's delivered to over 10,000 educators a week. Each week, there's a curated selection of 4 standout TTR shows, exclusive discounts, and exclusive offers from our sponsors. Sign up for it at our website, which is ttradio.org/newsletter. And as always, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, who publish professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com, so that's John Catt has 2 T's, to explore the full range of titles. While you're there, you can use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. And then lastly, but not least, if you're looking for another great education podcast, check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stock. Anna is a passionate advocate for evidence-based math education for students of all ages. On her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching math facts to tips for evaluating research shows type claims. She brings on top-notch guests, educators, researchers and policymakers, and discusses issues that directly impact teachers and students. Chalk and Talk is great for anyone interested in education. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. Okay. Hopefully, not only has that been a great chance to share the sponsors that make the show possible, but has given Katie a little bit of time to think about self-efficacy, smartphones, and AI. So, Katie, should we start with self-efficacy? So when we had Neil Gilbride on, he has recently written a book around self-efficacy and suggests that schools should frame what they're doing, their design courses, with self-efficacy in mind. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's a really important thing. It's something that we've sort of always had front and center of what we're trying to do at home with the children. And sort of the focus has always been, right, if you want something to happen, how do you make it happen? What can you do that's going to bring you closer to that goal? And obviously that applies in an academic sense, but it applies to a lot, pretty much everything in life as well. Like my younger boys, they watch a lot of Colin Firth, and they had a book there and it had this milk bottle raft. So it's like, well, okay, how do you build that? And they did. They figured out what it was they needed to do, and they went out and they built this thing. And you sort of do that in two ways. You do that by planning ahead, so that you're sort of saying, helping them figure out how to do things, sort of saying, right, okay, if you want to learn, say, something about this topic, how are you going to find a course? What are you going to find a book? How can you follow that through and learn? But you can also look back on things and sort of say, okay, you've done this before. You did that. How did you make that happen? And it's sort of mentoring to show that these are the ways you can make things happen in the world. And I think that's a really important thing.
So it sounds like home educating, you have to be quite nimble. Is that a reasonable interpretation?
I mean, there's lots of different ways to approach it, but for us, we very much come from one of our big drivers behind wanting to home educate in the first place was that we wanted them to be the driving forces. We didn't want it to be us sort of, sitting there and delivering stuff. We wanted to encourage them to be leading the way, and that it's a process. It requires sort of mentoring to get that in place. But yeah, there is a lot of just sort of going with the flow and thinking on your feet and sort of saying, well, okay, that's what you want to do. Let's figure out how to do it.
And have you ever had projects where it seems the wrong lesson has been learned? So things take a different course, or is there always something you can pick up whether something works or not?
Well, I think one of the big things is you don't have like, this is what I'm trying to teach them other than that sort of feeling of you have the agency to kind of try stuff here. So, where it goes is where it goes. There's been lots of projects that we kind of started and they've sort of fizzled out a bit. They haven't gone anywhere. And then there'll be a few things you sort of look back and you go, no, that was amazing. Like once we had this sort of long process where we go to the library a lot because we live in a rural area. There's not much else to do. So whenever they had something on, we went to the library when the kids were little, and they had storytelling workshops a few times. And then about sort of a few months later, I got an email from the librarian saying, oh, the storytellers told us about this storytelling competition up in there. I did know, and she thought your kids would be interested. So we're like, yeah, okay, do you want to do that? And they did. So they practiced and they went off to the storytelling competition, and then they competed in this storytelling competition. And as part of that, there were workshops, and they saw someone there playing the harp, and one of them just fell in love with the harp. So then we ended up figuring out how to do harp lessons, and she did that for 5 years. And you look back and you're like, yeah, that's an amazing story. But there were also a billion other things where we just went along to one event and they're like, yeah, fine, and it just sort of fizzled out. So
this is probably not the most salient detail, but what sort of harp are we talking? Is this a folk harp or a classical harp?
One of the big ones that stands on the floor. It's one of the big ones. So you don't. There's a lever harp or a pedal harp, but it's really good. I mean, obviously, apart from the fact it's enormous and quite expensive and not very movable.
Yes,
but it does make a beautiful sound, like more or less whatever you do to it, which is great in an instrument your child's learning.
Yes, that's true. So kind of the opposite of the classic violin, perhaps.
Exactly.
I'm only sidetracked because my wife is currently practicing on her lever harp to play at a couple of weddings, and she's down a couple of strings. So we may off off podcast, maybe, or radio show, I can check in with you about your best sources of strings, because we're having a bit of trouble.
You there.
Yes. Okay. Anyway, but that's not really why you're here. And you're not here to help me out with our violin or harp string quandary. That's an interesting kind of way in. So we're thinking self-efficacy, and that seemed to be a real window into your sense of purpose as a home educator, which we will revisit. And then we've also had guests in recent weeks talking about technology and how it relates to education. And I obviously, so listeners know, we share the questions ahead of time, so guests have a chance to kind of point towards the ones that perhaps are most interesting. And you're aware that many schools are very anti-smartphone, and you mentioned your children have had different relationships with tech. So where do you stand on smartphones and young people?
So on smartphones in particular, I mean, we personally have been quite cautious around tech, I would say. You know, we don't have like broadcast TV in the main rooms, and when they were younger, we tried to build it in so there's lots of good things you can get from tech as well. So we've always had, you know, sort of time that they get to play on games and things like that, but then it stops and the rest of the day they don't. So for us, that has always been before breakfast. It's like before breakfast you can play games. We've never done multiplayer games, so again we've been really cautious on the social media side. We haven't had any social media or any online gaming up until 16.
Okay. And am I right in thinking you worked in tech before homeschooling became your
Yeah, I did, and my
focus?
husband's continued to work
Yes,
for big tech companies, so we're very familiar with. And again, there are lots of positives as well. And one of the things we've sort of tried to focus on is using it in sort of creative ways rather than in just consumptive ways.
okay. For example?
Well, so sort of from in the mornings, they can do things so long as they're creating. And I have to say, some of the children can get quite creative with this. So my youngest would do an awful lot of games that he'd written and then tested for quite some time. But you know, the idea is you can be writing something on Word, you can be coding a computer game, but you can't just sit there on YouTube. And that's the rules.
And that's what you try to avoid then, that sort of consumption side of it.
Yeah, and I said there are sort of times in the day when that is built in, and we'll sit and we'll watch YouTube together, but we don't allow them to just be sitting watching YouTube on their own, at least not when they're younger. You know, obviously as they get older, you know, the rules have to shift a bit. But
yes,
again, if you're using it as a tool, and particularly with the home educating, there's a reasonable amount of stuff that is based online. So, you know, we'll have apps that are part of their schoolwork and, you know, online classes. So that sort of level of tech is just part of the work that they need to do, that they're doing.
Okay, so your kind of structure was more around how the tech was being used rather than a kind of blanket screen related rules or otherwise. Okay.
And we also have kind of a rule that it's always in the public spaces. So they don't have any electronics or tech upstairs. So while we're not like directly watching what they're doing, we can do. You know, you're sort of always walking past and you can just tell if something's going on that, you know, they're uncomfortable with, or, you know, it's that open relationship. So we've not wanted, you know, to say, right, you've got an hour, or, you know, you can do this and you can't do that, and here's the rules and you've got to earn it, or anything like that. We sort of said, this is an important thing to you, it's a useful thing, but we want to build it in a way that doesn't take over from all the other useful and interesting things.
Yes.
And then is, you know, joint. Yeah, it's not sort of just them on their own, or them with a whole bunch of people that we're not aware of.
Yes. And then on that front, so in terms of the devices that your children use, is there a sense of them being their devices? Do you have access to them? Is that quite communal? So did you have an approach to that side of things as well? Because that can be tricky to broach.
They have their own devices, but again, the rules have always been that we have passwords to them.
Yes.
And you know, we don't usually check, but again, everything is sort of public, so you can kind of, you know, just walk past and see what's on a laptop screen or a computer screen. And I mean, we have found with the phones are harder to do that with. But again, it's only the teenagers that have that. So the rules
Okay.
originally, you can have a phone when you can buy it yourself, which puts it quite far down the
Yes.
track. But
Yeah,
also,
that's quite a good move.
we don't need them for day to day. They need them when they go to sixth form, because that's got their bus ticket on, and it's got,
Yes.
the train and everything for all the college app and all of that. It becomes necessary at that point, at sort of 16, but it's not really necessary before then. So we haven't had that pressure to do it.
Thank you. So I think I'm just quite selfish, and I've got young children myself, and I'm just navigating this, and I always ask guests that. That's really helpful and interesting to observe. When we caught up briefly before today's show, you also mentioned that your children have very different views on AI, which stuck in my head because many of the young people I work with have very disparate views on AI, and many of the people I interact with on social media from schools and elsewhere have very disparate views. If you're happy, could you share your polemicized examples you gave of one child thinks this, one thinks that I found really interesting?
Yeah, so one of my children is very, very anti AI. I mean, she's doing an English literature degree. She's very into writing and reading, and I mean, I'm paraphrasing, so she may correct me later, but she basically views AI as stealing all of humans' heart and soul, and then churning it out as something bland that is taking away from real art, which is sort of people's views and talking to each other.
I've been a bit sweeping there. We're talking really about large language models, aren't we, here, and their capacity to construct
and there's lots of different versions of AI, but that's the particular thing that I think
yes
she's sort of most against.
Does she have an imagined or aspirational future that includes creating something with words?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I don't know whether, who knows where career goes, but she does her own writing, and that's something that's very important to her. And there is that long term of the sort of the jobs
existential
being
threat,
taken away.
Yes, I think that's something that I've occasionally been a bit flippant about, because I'm a bit older. I look at large language models and think it's interesting. Where will it change? How will the employment market change? But as a young person, that's the future is very much up in the air. So that's really interesting. You also mentioned that another of your children is an avid user of AI or large language models to create. So I'd be interested if you could say a little bit about that as well.
So he uses ChatGPT a lot, all the time. He's used it particularly for coding, but he also uses it sort of, he's very into Dungeons and Dragons, and he'll use it to help him create campaigns and talk through ideas for things. But he coded a text-based adventure game. You walk left and you see you search an item, and he did that himself, and he got quite a lot of help from ChatGPT. He'll say, how do I make it do this? And ChatGPT had given him some ideas. It told him how to put it up onto GitHub and get it automatically installed. And he's 12. This was a year or so ago, and he'd done all of that with the help of ChatGPT, just talking him through and suggesting ideas. And he would say things like, what could I add to my game now? And it would give him some ideas, and then he'd go off and do it and ask for help when he needed to. So it's it's something that he uses as a tool an awful lot.
And again, he's younger, and we often kind of go through a range of potential future careers. I'm still not sure, but I wonder whether his imagined, it's just that I think that's the best way. I wonder whether his imagined future involves coding or making games, or not.
Does. Or is that? I think that games sort of design of some form is something he's always been really interested in, and coding is something he's very, does see as his future. And I don't think he is quite young still. Is sort of really engaged with the idea of whether AI would take over from that. But the other thing with AI is sort of knowing where its limitations are. At the moment, it probably wouldn't do that. It's a good, at the moment, the sort of, at least the language models that we use are, they're good tools. They're sort of a slightly above average at things like coding and writing and marketing, but they're not as good as sort of really good people. Now that it's a really fast moving space, that could change.
Yes,
it's not there at the moment, but sort of as a parent thinking about my children heading out into worlds that this is changing quite dramatically. Yeah, there is a future where those AIs take away those sort of that little entry level of jobs, and how do you then get to the people who are really good at it and can direct it and can make this thing in the future? I
because
don't know where
there's
it's
a
all going to
problem,
go.
isn't there? If they take away entry level jobs, but they can't achieve this the level of an expert.
At the
So
moment,
what
the
builds
model
experts then?
Yeah, exactly. At the moment, the model is you have an expert who uses, an LLM to do the grunt work, but you only become an expert by going through that grunt work process. So how
Although
that funnel
maybe
is going to fall out, I don't know.
maybe your son's approach, I don't want to call him not an expert, but he's building games using code that he's learned aspects of it, but he's not an experienced coder. But he's gaining a form of expertise in learning its limitations, what it can and can't do. So maybe there's a route through there. I don't know, but
Yeah,
it's really hard to tell, isn't it? Do you have a view on the best way to prepare? It's only because we had Becky Allen last month. I asked the same question. It's just nice to hear different people's views. So one would be, is AI significant for the employment market, or is that kind of overhyped? And then if there's a yes to that, what's the best thing we can do when teaching young people, be that whether that's in home or school, so they're ready?
Well, right now, I think we don't know.
Okay.
Like as in the current level of it has fairly significant limitations, but it could jump that very quickly. And I don't know if it ever will or won't, if that's a year away or if that's 10 years away or 50 years away. And I mean, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas, but I don't think anyone really does know.
Well, a lot of people think they do, and there's a lot of certainty banding around. It's quite refreshing to have someone who's upfront with, we don't know. And I think
no idea.
No. And then, so if it was to be significant, what would young people need to learn to cope with? Or is there just too many hypotheticals there for that
I
to be any
think it
good
just cycles back
question?
actually to that. Well, this is, I guess, our driver, so I would think this, but it sort of cycles back to that. You need to be focusing on what can I do to get where I need to go. Like those sort of meta level skills are going to apply to anything, because you don't know if what you're going to need to do is learn how to get really good at AI at this point. You don't know if what you're going to need to do is come up with some alternative way to live, because there's not going to be a whole bunch of jobs anymore. You don't know. You have to be able to work in that uncertain space, and part of that is being flexible and sort of being able to learn what it turns out you need to know.
So you're hinting we're back to that model of self-efficacy, where the aim is to empower that person as a mentor to achieve a goal, but the meta aim is learning that I can achieve this, and sometimes you don't know where you're going when you first set the question.
Yeah, there's both not knowing where you go when you first set the question. You just know that you're kind of going to explore something and it's going to go somewhere. But then there is also, even with really tight goals, it's like it may be that what I'm learning now turns out not to be the useful thing, but I will know how to learn something fairly quickly when it turns out I do need to. So even my eldest, if it turned out she really did need to learn how to use AI, she would probably know how to do that. She didn't want to right now, but
yes,
it becomes obvious that there is no other option, and she does know how she could quite quickly get up to speed on that.
And that strong feeling is really interesting. I'd be really keen to speak with people, be they students or educators or others, who have a clear kind of iteration of the negatives and the concerns. That's really interesting. So we kind of circle back around to self-efficacy, and we're drifting into this conversation about homeschooling. So I think that's where we're gonna head next. Before we get to our planned questions, there's too many curveballs. We've got this overall theme that the aim is to empower that young person to learn how they can learn things quickly, and they learn a lot along the way, and sometimes the lessons they learn are different than they notice in the moment. Are there some core things, skills, knowledge that you think are fundamental before that or to support that?
I think, and this is something that's kind of, I think, quite different in a way within home education than within schools because of the setup.
Yes.
But I think that actually the core set of really, really essential knowledge is actually very small, and the set of potentially valuable knowledge is really huge. And by definition, anything that is completely essential is going to be contained within wherever you go in the wider sphere. Otherwise, it wouldn't actually be essential. So
Okay.
it's sort of always been, and I mean, obviously there are some things that at some point, even if you can work around them, eventually it will be a blocker. And getting those out of the way, being able to read and being able to write, I don't think they need focusing on quite as early as you do within a school system. But at
Is
some
that because
point,
you
that's
trust they
obviously
will
a problem.
happen?
It's partly because you
So-
trust they will happen, but also it's because you don't need them in order to scale up as early. So for
Okay.
instance, my older ones, I didn't, they started to read about age 6 or 7. And up until that point, we read to them and they talked
Yeah.
and they played, and there was lots of ways that they could still be learning that didn't involve them reading. Whereas in a classroom,
Yes.
that's a lot harder, and you sort of need everyone to be doing it earlier on. But we
Okay.
could, and then if that had not happened by, I don't know at what point I would have worried, like by 7, it's like, but she did get there pretty soon afterwards. But at some point, then you go, okay, this hasn't just happened. And then you can you've got the flexibility to just focus in on it and kind of get it sorted then.
Yes.
So you don't, one of the things with the structure of school is that it sort of relies on the whole mass moving along roughly at the middle pace.
Yes, to be honest, it makes it hard to think outside of that box.
Mm.
So I have to really think hard when listening to your answers, because I have these predetermined ideas about foundational knowledge and students becoming literate and basic numbers, and then they can access a curriculum and then they can learn. But I think that's all tied up with the fact that schools need that in order to function at scale. So it's just really interesting to hear a very different approach.
Yeah, and there are reasons why schools are set up that way. It's it is because of the structure and the scale of it, and those things are really important in schools, but they're just not when you've got the flexibility to sort of move, ebb and flow a bit more.
Okay, so I think we can move to our homeschooling questions. That's really interesting. Always learn something with these interviews. Thanks again, Katie, for joining us. And in the background, Tom Rogers is helping with tech and admin. So a shout out to Tom for giving up his evening for that. We've got, and Tom, you're welcome to chip in if you wish. We have homeschooling in recent years. How has it changed? And then also why?
So, I mean, the bigger thing is just more people are aware of it, and there's a wider sort of cohort of people that are considering it and that are doing it. It's grown quite a lot over the last period of time. And sort of, 18 years ago when we were first thinking about it, people would ask me if it was legal. And now if you mention it, they're like, yeah, my sister did, my cousin did, oh, we did for a little while. It's just much more well known and happening a lot more. And it's always been the case that there's been a mix of families like us who just sort of always wanted to do it because we just we wanted to do things as a family. We wanted to do something different from school. And then families who came to it, often after really quite a long time having a really difficult experience in school.
Do you have a feel of the proportions there? So
well,
if you could,
I think both of those groups have grown, but I think the second group has grown more. Sort of
and the second group is
awareness,
people who
the second group is sort of people who've come out of school sometimes quite late on because they sort of just assumed school would work and then it turned out it didn't, and then there's more awareness that actually this is a different thing you can try if school isn't working out. So I think both of them have grown. From my sort of surveys and things, it comes out as about 20% ish are the ones who either never went to school or sort of really early on came out, and more of those are sort of, and then that much bigger chunk have come out at some point later on.
And then so that there's so much we could spend the whole show on here, but those 80% that come out of the education system not having planned to from the start, is there a peak age at which that happens, and or one or two main maybe final reasons? I'm sure it's quite complex. But when does it
Well,
happen, and what's the main factor making it happen?
so, and this is one of the things I was sort of really interested in, just to see. I did this whole big survey on that because I wanted to see whether that would match up with my sort of anecdotes from support work. And what you tend to see is it increases over time, which I guess you'd expect. It's so more are coming out in secondary, quite a lot are coming out very, late on, year 9, 10, 11 even. Less so in year 11, kind of. If you've got that far, you can usually just eke it out until the end of exams. But 7, 8, 9, 10 is quite a peak. And sort of from when I asked people, and this matches with what I've seen sort of around support groups, is in primary school it tends to be they sort of feel it's special educational needs that aren't quite being met, and then in secondary you often see that sort of accelerate, and they sort of begun to fall further and further behind, and then that gets linked in with mental health concerns, and it's very hard to separate them out, because it will tend to be they feel they're struggling either on the academic side or socially side, and then often those two interact with each other, and it sort of becomes this spiral where it just gets harder and harder until they decide that actually that's not working and they need to try something else. And then I would say a lot of families then are really happy that they made that decision, and like, actually we should have just done this when it stopped working a lot earlier on. Not everyone, of course, but that is quite a common story, that they struggle and they struggle and they fight and they fight and they eventually decide to do something different, and then they're like, actually this just works better for us.
So I think that's going to take us to our next question, which is what the significant benefits are of coming out of mainstream schools. Then we're going to go on to think about what the challenges and limitations are. Before we get to that, you mentioned special educational needs. Is there any have you got any more detail on the particular needs, because that's such a broad category?
Yeah,
is there
I mean, it is a lot of autism and ADHD, and it's that sort of just not quite fitting the regular mold. And again, everyone has different profiles and their own story. There's a huge variety of stories, but it can be the children who are actually academically fine, but they struggle with the social side of it, the busyness, the noisiness, the other children, just all of that.
Schools
is really difficult for them.
They're really unusual places, aren't they? I remember interviewing students during lockdown, and most missed school, at least the second time, but a minority just didn't miss it and were quite unhappy to come back, because in their heads there's a lot of hassle, lots of moving around, lots of people, lots of busy spaces, and the learning was fairly minimal. I don't know if that aligned with your interpretation of schools.
So there's this big, it sort of looks like there's a big leap that happened over the COVID lockdowns with home ed, and it was growing already, but that certainly accelerated it. And for a lot of people, that was just a view into a different world that they hadn't thought about before. And for some of a lot of them, they were like, oh my god, I'm so glad they're back to school. But there were sort of a few other responses, and one of them was, actually it's really nice having them around, and it turns out they're learning loads with me helping them, and maybe we could do that. I'd never really thought of it, but maybe we could, and that would be fun. And then there were others who were like, actually they're really struggling with what they're being expected to do, and that they hadn't realized that before.
So there's all kinds of things you learn by watching your children learn. And I don't think this is a primary school thing. It's just that my oldest child was primary school age at the time. I was surprised at how little a child learns in a day.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, I thought they were doing like all this amazing stuff, and
all that learning all day. But
it is something that I could do. And I mean, one of the things you find when you're home educating, because there is a lot of school that it's the moving around between classes, it's the waiting for someone to settle down, it's occasionally I follow like schemes of work based on around a classroom, and you can get through most of it in about 10 minutes if you've got a child who really wants to, who's actually interested in it and is focusing right now. I guess you do know as a teacher that one-to-one tuition can just achieve so much more, and that's kind of what you get at home ed. So you can focus in the same amount of learning. It's very efficient in like quite a small amount of time, and that gives you a lot more time to do all the other wandering and seeing what might come out of it, and
Is
all
there
of that
anything?
flexible stuff.
So some of the problem with school is that I'm trying to educate 30 children from a predetermined point to a predetermined end within a year with like 200 hours of lessons. I don't know how much of that is changeable, but I don't know if you, from the outside, when you've taught a scheme of work in 10 minutes that I'm struggling through over several hours, have you got any advice? Like, what any ideas about what we could do differently? Because that does seem very inefficient.
The thing that I think about it is, there are reasons why schools are set up that way, because it is just a fundamentally different structure. And I think that is something that, people who are used to schools sort of need to be aware of if they're thinking about home education. But I think it's also something that home educators need to be aware of if they're thinking about schools, is that it just, the possibilities are different. You do need everyone to kind of be moving along at the same time, and therefore you need to spend the time on the people who aren't quite getting it, and the one who is could have gone off and done something else. But how do you manage that? It's I just have options.
Yes, it sounds very free.
classroom.
I think you
Yeah.
might be converting me, which is tricky given that I work full time. So, but before we get to our promised question, which is what is the most significant benefits of teaching outside of mainstream schools? So I think you're touching upon now. So I'll give you again time to think about that, and then the challenges. It's time for a little reminder of our newsletter. So it's called Sound Bites and Insights. It goes already out to 10,000 educators a week. It has a curated selection of 4 TTR shows from each week, plus discounts and offers from our sponsors. Sign up for it at ttradio.org/newsletter. And a reminder, this show, as all of our shows, is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, who publish professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles and use the code JCTTR2425 to get a massive 20% off your order. So I will go straight to the question. I've got so distracted by your answer. I'm sorry, Katie. I asked, what are the main benefits of coming outside of is it a mainstream school system? Is that language? Does that work? Have I sort of misnamed it? I'll leave it to you from there.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming out of mainstream. It's coming out of sort of the local authority side of things, full stop, because even in AP they have more flexibility, but you are still tied to a lot of timelines that we're not. So I mean, there's that flexibility of what you're learning when. There's that flexibility just day to day. We can say, like, it's sunny, I'm going to go to the waterfall, or I'm going to build something outside, and we'll do what we plan to do today on Saturday when it's going to rain. You can mix it around like that, but you're not tied to that end stop at 16. So with schools, you've sort of got this idea that you have to get all this into them because at 16 it stops and you've lost them. Whereas if this is your child, just say, right, if you're 16, so you're done now.
So you pound for that relationship to continue.
Yeah, exactly. So you if they're not ready for GCSEs, then it's fine. You just wait a year. Or if they are ready when they're 12 or 13, you're like, well, okay, let's just do that. And that's something a lot of home educators and we've done, is you sort of spread out the exams so you can, again, you've got those options. And because you only need to think about, I've got 4 children, so there are still compromises, there's
some logistics there,
trade-offs, but I don't have to optimize for what is best for the 1,000 children in this school. And each decision I make for one of them is going to impact, at least in some way, on all of the others. I only have to juggle those 4.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Kapow Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to kapowprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
So I don't know where to go with this, but my insight is that lockdown and home learning and parents being more aware what happens in schools has made us more aware that schools are sort of suboptimal because they're not designed for one or just four children. They're a state level response to the challenge of mass education.
I would say they are optimizing for something different.
Okay, tell us a bit more about that then.
Well, I mean, and I think this is something that can be quite challenging for teachers to hear. It is the thing of it's an economic optimization, right? It's childcare, as Laura McInerney says quite often.
That's a big part of it, isn't it? We are
economics.
childcare. This is what part of our job. Yeah.
I mean, to do what we've done, I gave up my job, and once upon a time, maybe you could have a parent. It was normal to have one parent at home the whole time, and people, you can juggle it in lots of different ways. But essentially, if you've got a few children in the house, you need an adult ready to look after them, and school does that at mass on scale, and that is a pretty important part of why that structure's set up. I mean, because
you gave us a kind of trigger warning. Are you saying that schools are very efficient at keeping children occupied all day so their parents can work?
I mean, I think that is a key aspect of what they do. I mean, whilst you've got the children, you may as well do something useful with them. But
yes. So, but
I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but
yes.
That structure of mass school affects absolutely everything that happens within school, to a way that I don't know that. I mean, I'm jumping forward to other questions about what people within the school system don't necessarily think about that much, and it is the way that we have set schools, and there are reasons why we've done that. It wasn't just like a random chance and we've got it all wrong. It's like that's how it works at scale. But that affects behaviour, it affects curriculum, because you've kind of got everyone to do the same thing, and you've got a lot of people in a small space and not very many adults to control them. So you kind of need to keep them busy. And then if you're deciding what they're going to do, because they can't all just do their own thing because there's 1,000 of them, and you can't support that with one person or two people to 30. So then that follows that you're going to tell them what to do, and therefore all of the things about how do I plan a curriculum and everything do become important, because you're making all these people do this. It should be worth their time. It's sort of, whereas if they're choosing to do it and you've got that efficiency that you sort of know you can fill in gaps fairly quickly if you discover them, you've just got more flexibility to let them run with that, because that's okay. But if you're doing that for 1,000 people, that might not be okay.
So there's some trade-offs very far upstream that are to educate at scale. Choice becomes harder to facilitate. Curriculum need to be more clearly iterated. And you mentioned kind of behavior management of people and space become more significant. It's really interesting. And we could just talk about this question, but there's lots of interesting questions we've got. So we're going to move to the next one. So we've heard some of the benefits of coming out of the mainstream school system. What are the biggest challenges or limitations?
So I think one of the big challenges is that it is all on you. So that sort of sense of responsibility, and also just, even if you're signing them up for a class, you've got to find that class, you've got to think about it, you've got to make sure they're involved in it. It's a lot for a person to take on. And again, that's where the efficiency of a school, you're spreading that load. Everyone's designing a curriculum. You're not doing it individually for every person, because there's a lot of energy goes into that. and particularly exams, that all becomes more pressured. It feels a lot higher stakes. You've got to find an exam centre, you've got to pay for it, which is really quite significant. I mean, we're sort of 6 seasons in, we've got a fairly good setup now, but it was quite a scary moment sort of coming up to that and going, I just don't know how this is going to work, and can I do this?
How do you get in? So if I was homeschooling and we're approaching exam ages, so we're ready to take some GCSEs, imagine, this shouldn't be too hard because I clearly don't know. I don't know what to do. Like, what do you do? That seems quite hard.
Yeah, well, I've done a whole webinar series on this and a guide, so there's a lot of, one of the ways that home education works, again, I don't think everyone outside is aware of, is there is a lot of peer-to-peer support. So a lot of that is through Facebook groups, but it's also in-person meetups and groups and things. So for a start, whilst home educating, you've usually made connections with other home educators who are a bit further ahead, and you've seen how they do it, and you can ask them how they do it. So that's sort of your first step. But more practically, you find an exam centre, and there's sort of 2 main sorts of exam centres. One of them is a commercial one, so it's set up in, usually urban areas where there are enough people who are going to come along and pay to sit private exams there, and they kind of just do exams. Sometimes they're tutor centres as well, or
Okay.
it is like a local school who, for some reason, out of the kindness of their heart, has decided that they're going to let private candidates sit in as well. You still have to pay usually. And
Is it cheaper via a school or not?
It depends. The school that we use does just charge us cost, so that is cheaper than a commercial centre. It's a bit of a misnomer, because the commercial centre, it's not actually a business anyone makes like vast sums of money out of, but if it's a commercial centre, they've got to pay their exam officer, they've got to pay for the building, all of that, which a school just sort of has. So you pay for invigilation, you pay for the exam board fee usually, and maybe a bit of an admin on top. So it's your sort of average price at the moment is about £250-300 per GCSE. So that's,
Wow.
it's not a small thing.
No. Okay. And while we're there, you said schools out of the kindness of their heart will, and I think that's literally because there's not really an incentive apart from goodness to.
No, there is no. I mean, it's quite vulnerable, to be honest, the position that you're in as a home educator, because there is no one that actually has a responsibility to make sure there is somewhere you can sit exams, and that means it's quite variable across the country. So you might live in an area where you do have quite a few good options. You might live somewhere where there just isn't anything. It's quite common to have to go and stay overnight in a hotel to get to somewhere where you can sit an exam, which again all adds on to the costs. And if you need access arrangements, that again is far more complicated to organise. So there's fewer centres can do it. You might have to travel further and pay more. So it's, you sort of, a lot of people will either come out of school or be in school and kind of go, oh yeah, so right, presumably there's just someone I ask and they go, oh yeah, you set it up and you go over here, and it's a lot more complicated than that.
So is this a growing challenge for home educators? Because numbers, I think they're going up.
It's always been on that sort of, you ask someone or there might be something nearby. It has always been a little bit rocky, but it is getting a lot worse because the numbers are going up and the pressures on schools are going up. So we're finding that the number of schools who can do it is, and I completely understand why, because if the school is already, on their knees, they don't have enough invigilators, they don't have enough rooms, it's really complicated.
Especially with access arrangements are growing.
And even,
I know we have, yes.
So one of the schools that's been offering for a while, someone said they asked, and they had 200 private candidates asking, and they could fit about 18 in. So the demand and the supply is not matching up at the moment, and that's.
Does it need intervention then?
I mean, I think so. Amongst home educators in general, there's no common view on anything basically amongst home educators. A whole bunch of different people, but
yes.
There are some who are worried that if it does get to a point where, say, a local authority has to let you sit exams, then that will come with more strings about how
I
they
see.
want you to be preparing for exams, whether they want you to take it, because it's, you don't have to, and lots of people have got, different routes in mind or different reasons why they don't actually want to take GCSEs. So
Yes.
it's being, and also we've got the flexibility at the moment to do a whole bunch of different subjects, and some of that is because we have to use international GCSEs because the regular GCSEs don't work, but some of it is just we just like, there's more options. So one of mine's that human biology that's not available as a GCSE. There's things like environmental management and travel and tourism and things that are available, and again there's a worry that you'd cut those down and you
Yes.
wouldn't have as many options. But
Okay.
my personal view, and it was obviously the children's wellbeing bill is going through at the moment, which contains some home education stuff, and I'd sort of hoped that that would be an opportunity to get some intervention in, to just say, if you want to sit an exam, we'll make sure there's an exam centre for you. But that didn't happen.
That's not made it in? Okay.
No, there's nothing that helps with exams in there, which I think is a shame.
Okay, so that sounds like a big challenge with home educating, and just the little hints there that it's a complex domain, because obviously this sweeping assumption about home educators, you've hinted that some of them would be reluctant for more regulation, some might not want the GCSE route, and then others, including yourself, would say that access should be kind of guaranteed or ensured somehow.
Yeah,
but
and
there doesn't seem to be an easy fix there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they necessarily have to be linked together. It's like, the local council can make sure there's a swimming pool in your local area, and then if you want to learn to swim, you've got a way to do that, because you can't really provide your own swimming pool. You can choose for yourself whether you go and swim. So from my perspective, like an exam centre should be a bit like a swimming pool or a library. There should just be a facility there, and then you still have all those choices of whether you use it or not. But at the moment, it's very unevenly distributed as to whether that swimming pool is there or not in the first place.
Bit potluck depending on where you are in the country, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think it can.
Yeah. Okay. So, and again, you started on this another kind of line of inquiry a bit earlier, which is, so I've met you at a couple of research conferences. So I think it was Rethinking Ed and maybe Research Ed, some others. So you speak to teachers, and our box thinking you must encounter quite regularly. So I'm interested in what you think we misunderstand or fail to think about when it comes to learning, that maybe is a product of this working within the system. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
So I think we kind of covered quite a lot of this already, in that it is just that awareness of how much the structure of school affects what you have to do with it, and that actually once you're outside of that, a lot of that just doesn't apply anymore. I mean, some things do, the whole idea that you learn things through paying attention to them, it's still true, but outside of school you've just got so many more options for how you harness the attention that's already happening, and you can do that really efficiently, and how you can, you've just got that much more flexibility for things to play out, and then there is that thing that actually school is really quite a weird environment. I mean, particularly for teachers, you're also doing that, but
yes,
most of the world, we don't all end up in exactly the same place with lots of noisy people, and you're supposed to pay attention and be enthusiastic about it whether you want to or not. And as a child, the only thing that puts you there is that you were born about the same time and you live in roughly the same place, and suddenly you're not allowed to spend time with your family, and you're not allowed to go outside when it's sunny.
I think it's hard.
This is the point when you do history for half an hour and then you go and do something else.
You did warn us it's hard to hear that, but I think there's something about being a teacher, being able to at least briefly reflect upon the fact that for many young people, schools are not great. Not because anyone's doing anything wrong, it's just going from place to place to do an arbitrary set of lessons in courses that we haven't decided to take isn't necessarily optimal for the individual. It's just worth, I think it's worth knowing. I think sometimes I drift too far that way and think, oh, schools are awful, because they're not. Because in the same moment, there are young people that their lives are transformed by school, and any given day some students are learning a lot and really enjoying it, but it just seems messier than sometimes I think as teachers we fail to recognize that. And it might hold us back a bit because we have these very simplistic, but I'm over speaking. Do carry on.
No, I think it's really natural, isn't it, as a human, to see things from your perspective. And I think,
Yes.
the other thing is you have, this is the water you're swimming in, and this is, what you have to do. You do have a goal for that lesson, and not everybody in that room shares that goal, but you're sort of still responsible for it. And there's a whole thing with schools about being held responsible for something you don't actually have agency over necessarily, or the ability to ensure happens, and that's always very stressful, I think.
So I think,
and that's true for both students and teachers, I think, in a way, that you're held responsible for things that you can't, or that aren't always within your control.
What I think maybe highlights that is starting with you talking about homeschooling and the fact that it's an uncertain domain, and you beyond some very basic core skills, so being able to read and write, and you're not too fussed about them happening at 5. It could be 6, 7, because they'll get there, and there are other ways to access. That's quite a messy process, and that sounds different from the way we see things in schools. But I'm wondering whether the school structure is kind of trying to impose system and order and this kind of hierarchical approach on a process that is quite messy. And sometimes as teachers, we miss that bit, and you're left with kind of a compromise. But before I just waffle on in what's meant to be an interview, that's what I think I need to go away and think about more. So that's really helpful to kind of have that idea.
I mean, there's the book, isn't there, the hidden lives of learners or something, the Graham Nuttall one.
Yes.
And that's one of the things, maybe it's obscure, but I read it. It's about how actually what you think is happening, what you plans to happen in that lesson and in that classroom.
It's so far, isn't it, from those 30, those kind of descriptions of those children talking about a recent relational fallout. That's what they're thinking about in that hour. That's what's happened. Whereas I've got my learning objective. It's messy, isn't it?
Exactly, and there's a lot of that, and that is partly, I think, behind that shift to secondary and that all being really complicated. Because again, it's a structural thing. There are all of these people. It's incredibly social. It's just constantly social relationships that often you're quite tuned into, and that's really where your focus is. And
yes,
again,
and part of that is the school, isn't it?
Or bad, or
it's just different, isn't it? So in a school, I've got a large social group
there.
I've got to learn to navigate it as well as learn biology. They're both happening in that same moment. But it's interesting you mentioned Graham Nuttall, because his take on schools being places that are really about ritual and routine and not that interested in learning, I think maybe another angle on your insight on schools and what they're efficient at and not. But again, I think that's probably for me to go and think about more. Am I right in making that link, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's mentioned that there is a lot. Each of those people in your class are people, and they've got their own set of goals and outcomes and things that they're interested in, and things that are actually going to be useful to them, either that they recognize or don't in the future. And as teachers, you obviously love the subject that you're doing, and you can see all the really good things about it, and they are there. They are absolutely great things, but that doesn't mean every child in your class is ever going to appreciate them.
Yeah,
you want them to, but they've got their own part of it they're bringing to it.
It's a complex business, isn't it? So I've got a couple of questions just before we kind of come to a close. Well, in relation to homeschooling, do you have thoughts on where things are going? Because you've mentioned this kind of increase in interest and different people, the reasons why people get into homeschooling. Where do you think it's heading?
Well, I mean, there is the Children's Wellbeing Bill at the moment, which so it's sort of cementing a process that has been happening, where there's across the whole of society, but particularly with home education, where it's sort of moving away from just trusting parents to make good choices for their children to sort of a place where the state is going to have a much more of an involvement in that. So that change, sort of seeing where that goes, that could affect home education in fairly significant ways. It's sort of might or might not, because there's a lot of it depends on how the guidance is then written, and the guidance has been changing, and it has, I said, already moved quite a lot towards more oversight and more involvement and more sort of checking up. And obviously people quite like the idea of checking up, and that's fair, but it has to come from a place of understanding that you have all of those options. And so it could go either way still, and there's a lot, it's only in the Lords, there's people raising objections to some of the things that are more worrying about it. But it does make me worry that the things that I did for my children that I think were really, really beneficial for them might be harder in the future.
Have you got some specifics of things that you did that you wouldn't be able to if the bill kind of goes in one particular direction?
So I said the things about we left reading and writing, and if you looked at what particularly my two older ones, their experience basically the whole of primary school, it just looked like playing. And it was playing that I put lots of thought into what options they had, but as far as they were concerned, it looks like one long summer holiday, kind of. And I think that was great because it gave them lots of opportunities to experience all sorts of things and to get that self-efficacy of the things that they learnt, down to including reading and writing, was because they had decided they wanted to, and they went out and they did it. And that, I think that has been really powerful for them going forwards. And they made the choices about what classes they wanted to then take, what GCSEs they wanted to take, and they've both got a real just thirst for learning. They're interested, and they've never seen it as a chore. So that's, they went into sixth form for A level, and it's always hard to say about your own children, but they were the kids who did well. They were the kids who volunteered for stuff. They were the kids who were enthusiastic and interested and did the extra reading and chatted in class and all of that, because it was something they'd always really wanted, and they would always experienced it as just part of life. And so I worry we will get to a checklist point when they're like, well, hang on a minute, they're 5, where's your reading? The phonics,
okay,
what's going on here?
Yeah.
And that will impact on, the style that we had. And then from the other side of it, where people have come out of school because that approach wasn't working, there also has to be that awareness that, that didn't work then. It's not the most important thing if you've got a child who is in a fairly severe mental health crisis. And actually the threat that they might get sent back to school because currently they're not doing enough English, it's really stressful. It's not helpful to that child to get back into a place where they are able to do that.
Okay, so there's a lot of your answers we could have dug into a lot further. So if I wanted to find out more about the kind of thinking you've shared, is there anywhere to go, like things to read, watch, events, networks? How do you find out more?
Well, so I've got a Substack called Learn What You Live on Substack, and that's sort of looking more at things like the survey that I did about the reasons why people home educate. I put occasional random things on, but that's probably the best place to start. I'm on Blue Sky again as Learn What You Live. I chat a lot there. I'm always open to just general questions. So yeah, I'd start with those two places, and feel free to chat to me anytime.
Thank you. So I think we've covered a lot of ground, and as always, I'll go away, and this show will then be reshared as a podcast on all the usual platforms. I think one of the main takeaways for me is thinking really hard about what, as a school, we can learn from your experience in homeschooling and others as well. Is there one thing you'd like to kind of finish with? So my takeaway is that sometimes schools misunderstand what schools really are and how they function. Is there anything that works the other way? So when someone's going into homeschooling, where their view of what learning is changes?
I think it usually does, and I think if this is people who are moving to home education, I would say do get in touch with other home educators, do talk about it, do that thinking. It doesn't have to be just the same as school. You do have those options, and part of the point of moving out of school is to take advantage of them. But it does require you to sort of think in a different way, which again, if you've been only thinking of the school approach for a really long time, that can be hard to do.
Yes.
And I think in terms of, I guess, what I would like to see more of is perhaps a bit more of an overlap. So more of an, and this is not necessarily something individual schools can do because it's linked to all of the structures in place, but just more of an awareness that where school isn't working out and parents are prepared to take on this amazing, this huge responsibility. Like, this is a good thing. It's positive that a parent wants to do this, and then what they get for it often is sort of judgment and being told that they're failing and nothing. And I feel like it should be possible for there to be a bit more of an overlap and a bit more kind of collaboration where that's, where both sides are happy for that, sort of say, actually, how can we help you a bit more with this thing that you want to do?
And again, we could spend a lot of time exploring. That sounds like a really interesting and important side of things as well. But I'm aware also that you've given up an hour of your evening, and we heard at the start that you're how busy you are, all the things that you're doing. Thank you very much for your time. Much appreciated. And we will share the show via the usual channels kind of the next kind of week or two. And if anyone has questions for myself or for Katie, if you share them via X or elsewhere, I'm sure that we can get back to you, because we're keen to kind of get that conversation going with our listeners. A reminder, if you've not done it yet because you've been captivated by the discussion, do sign up for our newsletter, and you can find that on the Teachers Talk Radio website itself. And then secondly, this show has been supported by John Catt Education, and then don't forget that JCTTR 2425 for a discount on any purchases you might make from there. Thanks again, Katie. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll be back after an August break with the next episode of Classroom Chronicles. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.